I'm Dr. John. Welcome to the Voyage Clinics podcast. And our objective in the Voyage Clinics podcast is just to help people learn and grow and become awesome. Today we have my wife, Shauna Sanders, with us. She's awesome.
Hi.
And one of my favorite people in the whole world. I say that a lot, but I really mean it this time. Criselle Ransom.
Thank you.
The legend. Let's do introductions, and we'll start with Criselle.
So, I'm Criselle.
Criselle has an awesome accent.
I'm Criselle. I'm from South Africa.
Yes.
Born and raised. My parents were born and raised. My great-grandparents, my great-grandparents were all born and raised, so I am South African.
Super South African.
And I am also American now because I married an American.
Let's go.
But yeah, I was born and raised there and married an American, came here in 2008. I've lived China, Thailand, the UK, now the US.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of been all over.
Yeah.
I'm a certified professional midwife, licensed in Utah. I'm not currently practicing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back in school, trying to apply to medical school next year.
Woo-hoo.
So that's me.
Yeah.
I have a husband, Pete, and a son, Joel.
Pete and Joel.
Yeah. Love
Also
them.
wonderful people. Shauna.
I am born and raised in the United States.
Let's go. Generations.
Generations in the United States. I would love to go to South Africa someday.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah, someday.
You've been invited.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in English. I have a JD and an MBA from BYU later in life. So I'm really well-versed in the academic space. And John and I have 4 kids. I've been on the podcast before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's significant to state that you're minored in math.
I did. So my undergrad, I did a major in English, and then I double minored in math and French.
And I think I think it is impressive. It's both brains, right? Right brain, left brain. And I think that from that space, you'll bring some really neat perspective to our discussion today. Let us introduce our discussion today. Today, we're going to talk about learning, knowledge, understanding, growth, and then some of the pitfalls to that process in our lives with the age of information and sometimes the age of misinformation. And so I think we are going to just cover a whole depth and breadth of things. I would consider all of us very passionate learners. I am among the most passionate of learners. I love to learn, and I am aggressive. My teachers growing up would, they eventually came to really like me, but I would get angry if I didn't understand it, and I would just fight to learn. And I think they eventually liked it. I was like student of the month or whatever, student of the year or whatever. And in my little 1A high school of 23 kids in my class, but I just was always passionate about, didn't matter if it was earth science, if it was math, if it was, I worked at a mechanic shop. I wanted to know how things worked and where to put this and that. And I just love it. It's just a fun process for me. Undergrad was in sports medicine, the athletic training stuff, and then I did a medical school and residency in Florida, and so and family medicine is the broadest of learning venues. I mean, you gotta know a lot of things and keep studying your whole life, and it's super fun. So I want to just talk about learning and your guys' journey in that space and what you're passionate about and why, and where does this knowledge stuff come from, in all the spaces? Because I think it's a little different might be a little different in humanities than it is in mathematics, than it is in maybe the science space. There's a journey there a little bit. So take it away, Criselle. Anything? What are your thoughts?
I think our society is set up to be, for knowledge gathering, to be a capitalist endeavor.
Yeah.
And once you can move away from that being the primary goal, even though it's important that we be able to provide for our families or be competent and knowledgeable in a specific area, if you can move away from that being the primary goal, then learning becomes much more natural and you can learn in good ways and learn in ways that expand your horizon instead of shrinking it.
I thought you were talking about the academic institutions being capitalism as their primary goal.
Well, that's possible too.
It's in both spaces.
That's both. Yeah. But learning does not have to be within an academic institution either, correct. Right? Mm-hmm. So there's a broad range of ways that you can approach education. And in my case, it's been multi-tiered. Mm-hmm. So I also did an undergrad in physiology, and then I became a doula, which was a very hands-on process. Then I became a childbirth educator, and then that was also hands-on. And then midwifery, that was academic and hands-on. That was through an apprentice model and an academic program. And then having to return back to school to get another degree so that I can apply to medical school, that was through an academic institution. But in each space, I've learned something valuable that I hope will help me serve the world and make the world a better place and help people around me.
Mm. So the intention by which we pursue education can really sculpt the way we learn, how we learn, and what we learn, and then what we do with it eventually as well. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I think a lot of people, I mean, I know I was taught this, right? Like, you're going to college. You need to go to college. Well, why? Like, what's the, well, because then you'll get a better job, right? You'll be able to provide for your family. And I think even through all of those things, I still was just always curious and passionate about learning. So
yeah. We call that a golden thread. Uh-huh. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's a golden thread in your life, is that you love to learn. Yeah. And your motivation for learning doesn't have to be purely capitalist or enriching or whatever, depending on where you are in your life. Yes, you do need to go to college so that you can get a good job and provide for your family and make a good income, right? But that doesn't have to obscure the other purposes of education, which is personal development. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Shauna has 100% done that.
Just keep going to school. I want to maybe question the assumption that different kinds of learning go on in the arts and humanities versus the sciences versus even the trades versus apprenticeships. I think that learning in general, and it's been my experience that it's all hands-on. Like, the only way that you can really understand mathematics is to put pencil to paper and work out the problem until you arrive at the solution. The only way that you can really learn how to install a water softener is to take wrench in hand and work out the nuts and bolts until you've arrived at the solution. So a teacher isn't necessarily someone that opens up your brain and puts the knowledge inside, regardless of whether they're teaching you how to deliver a child or how to solve a derivative. A teacher is someone who facilitates an environment where you can accomplish that new task. And it's the same if it's English, if you're learning how to read and analyze a work of literature or a poem, or in the arts, if you're learning how to accomplish a certain style of painting. It's all hands-on in a way, so that like, I think if we learn what we learn in school, whatever kind of school we're in, is how to learn, basically. Yes. And so as we take those skills to be able to learn into the world, then we can learn in a wide variety of situations, right? Like, we just, the best teachers are the ones that help us figure out how we learn individually so that we can translate that skill to whatever we put our brain to.
And they're all common characteristics of good students too. A good student is humble, is curious, is diligent, if you have those qualities.
Angry. I was mostly angry.
Sometimes angry, but that...
I don't get it. You teach me until I get it.
But no matter what the environment or the topic is, if you have those characteristics, then you can learn.
Yeah. I like it. I think setting the stage for the process of understanding and growth and learning as people and individuals is wonderful.
Yeah.
I want to pivot a little bit to knowledge, the base of knowledge. For millennia, humankind has been learning and growing and understanding things. So we went dark ages. We were like, there's a wheel. Let's do a wheel. Oh, there's fire. Cool, fire.
It's maybe earlier than the dark ages.
This is way before that. But we've been understanding things. We've been observing the world and thinking on things and receiving some information and some understanding, and really doing the cerebral work to really discover new cool things. You've got Isaac Newton, and you've got these theories and these ideas, and it's beautiful and it's powerful. And where does all this knowledge come from, and how do we expand our knowledge base? I feel like we've come a long ways, and I mean, where does it all? How do we gain it, and then how do we continue to move forward through gaining more knowledge and truth? Shauna's got some ideas.
I do. Mm-hmm. How do we gain it? We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Mm-hmm. We build on the work of the people that have come before. So before Isaac Newton put his brain to figuring out, I think he was a physicist, and he created calculus to be able to solve physics problems. Does that sound that?
It sounds right.
However, I think that was the case because so he had to where do I go from here? He had to learn through exploration and observation of the world around him, what he knew to be true from experience, and then from what he knew from his own experience to be true, to extrapolate what could or may definitely also be true as a result of what he knows to be true, right? Mm-hmm. So in mathematics, for instance, you learn how to prove theorems based on what you know is true, if a triangle has an angle that's 90 degrees, mm-hmm. well, then the square of the two sides that make up that 90-degree angle is equal to the sum of the square of the sides is equal to the square of the leg that connects those two sides, the hypotenuse. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, mathematicians all along history have taken what we know to be true, and I guess you could call it learning, but it's more of a process of discovery. Mm-hmm. They have discovered new truths based on working with what they knew to be true. Mm-hmm. And, the same could be said of the arts, maybe, each new movement in, say, painting, right? If you're talking about pointillism, if you're talking about, help me out here, cubism, if you're talking about all of these different movements in the arts, those were artists taking what they knew to be true about the properties of the paints they're using and the properties of the natural world, all of these different things that they had learned, and then mm-hmm. using that to discover new expressions. That is a form of learning as well, right? When Picasso figured out this way of using paints to create a certain effect in his paintings that was now known as cubism, right? Mm-hmm. Picasso was cubist. I'm not an art history major, so some of that knowledge is not in my wheelhouse, but he was learning cubism mm-hmm. that we now study, but he was learning it as well. He was just discovering it. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that answers your question. Frankly, I don't remember exactly what your question was.
No, this is it. So expanding the knowledge base, building on the shoulders of giants, people who have made headway in math, in science, in literature, in arts, in dance, and created scaffolding upon which we can plug into, learn from these teachers, these mentors, these electricians, the mechanics. They've twisted so many wrenches. They know exactly how all these things work, and so they're able to share and pass that knowledge down, and then we can investigate that information and maybe even expand it as we push the limits of those spaces, whether it's arts or math or science. There's more than 3, but but those spaces, I think it's cool.
Well, and often I think we need to remember that often the new knowledge is built on the gaps that our predecessors left behind, the imperfection in their systems. There would be no need to explore any further if they had solved it all. So even though the knowledge we have at that time is so valuable and it creates the foundation of what we're building upon, we are building on a lack of knowledge, a gap, because there's something that we need to understand further. It's an imperfection in our understanding that drives us to learn more. So basically what I'm saying is we have to accept that where we were 5 years ago doesn't reflect poorly on the people who were working on that problem 5 years ago just because it was imperfect.
Yeah.
They improved on their models that they received. Like you said, we stand on the shoulders of giants.
This phenomenon of changing knowledge and growing, expanding our understanding is really, really beautiful. And I think one that we need to appreciate and be willing to change our minds.
Yep.
In medicine and science, I'm a family doctor, we change our minds a lot. Science comes out and says, actually, that was incorrect. And by science, I mean just the studies, the data on that practice or on that medicine or on the pharmacology of this equation. It may change. And then we need to be able to change our minds and say, well, what we did for 10 years is no longer correct, and we need to change that. I think that there is strength in that neuroplasticity, no matter the profession, computer programming or mechanics or any of those things. If we're willing to be courageous and push the envelope and consider new areas that we might research and figure out truths in, I think it's neat. I think that's a neat process.
The true scholar requires a large measure of humility in order to be able to change your mind or recognize areas where what you thought was true is not, or find those gaps in the knowledge base and not just come into it assuming that everything that has come before is perfect and complete, or everything that you are doing or have done is also perfect and complete. Because there's not going to be a lot of change or growth that can happen if you don't have the humility to be able to look at even your own work or the past works and say, find the holes and allow it to be imperfect.
One of the spaces I'm most passionate about learning is science, and I just love all of it. And I like mycology. I'm a hobby mycologist. I like mushroom forest. I just love the observations, the understanding, the new growth in those spaces. Medicine and even in just academic science, it's incredible. A lot of my PhD level professor folks, they start with a question. Do we know the answer to this question? And then they just conduct good research in that space to try to discover the answer. And that's a very convoluted, very complex process if it's done right. And it's normalized, and there's all these variables that you have to adjust for. But it's beautiful to see an outcome and then to be able to stand on that published paper and say, this is a really decent study. And this observation that this hypothesis, the thought, this question that they were trying to answer, turns out that this is the answer. And so that becomes among the body of truth out there that's really cool and really powerful.
Or even a step further from that, we conducted this amazing study and we can't tell you any more what the answer is than before we started the study.
Mm-hmm.
Because a good study sometimes yields that result.
Yep. And be able to eat that. Mm-hmm. The more that I'm in it, the more that I've learned over my life, the more that I've learned that the vastness of the lack of understanding is out there. And there is a tremendous holes in what we understand and know as humans. And it's cool. I think it's exciting. It's also it creates vulnerability for folks to poke holes in and to probe in some philosophy that might not even have any backing at all. And so we'll get into some of that in a little bit. But I think I wanted to lay the groundwork of just knowledge, understanding, growth, learning, and how beautiful and cool that is as we tap into the body of knowledge that we already know. And then as we're growing through that knowledge of that body of knowledge, there's an end. Whoa, there's an end. And then therein lies academia, right? Therein lies research projects and the multitude of fields. And everyone, in every academic institution in America, we are conducting some kind of research in some kind of direction. Mm-hmm. And it's cool. It's really cool to expand that knowledge. I want to go into the age of information. We're in an age, when Shauna and I were younger, maybe you too, but there were these data was hard to come by. Oh, yeah. Information, you had to go to the library. You had to look it up in these, what do they call it? Card catalogs?
Yes.
I remember using those. I was I remember just spending a day learning how to do that. And now, man, information is just click, 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 and boom, you're in. Even in the science spaces, you got PubMeds, you've got these easy access to tons of data. That's really unique, and it's a beautiful time for learning and growth, for sure. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Go ahead. Did you want to?
No.
Criselle and I were speaking about this before the podcast started because I was considering the pre-podcast. Mm-hmm. I was considering that there is an information economy that has undergone a vast shift since the birth of the internet. Prior to that, like you said, you had to go to the library, you had to look it up in a card catalog. I had to look, when I was doing my undergrad in English, we went to the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. It was like a bound card catalog for essays and critical pieces that people had written about English literature. So we'd go to the Periodical Guide to literature. We'd look up my subject. I would try and find the journals. I had to requisition the journals. Either we would do an interlibrary loan if my library didn't have that, or we'd get it from the archives of the library and then read those and then sort of assimilate that information and put it together in the argument that I was trying to make. Now, so the drawback to that was information was not readily available and there was a cost to it. But it was a cost I could see, right?
A cost for your own diligence.
Correct. Right. No, and a monetary cost. I paid tuition to the university, and the university used part of my tuition dollars to pay to have those journals. And those journals, would collect articles from authors that they paid the authors to write those critical articles. And then they had peers that, as part of the editorial board of the journal, that would review those articles for accuracy. And so all along the way, there's a monetary cost to that system that also functions kind of to help vet the information that we're being provided. So they're the gatekeeper, they vet, and they make sure that kind of the flow, the economy of information is flowing in a certain direction. But with the birth of the internet, it's completely disrupted and rebuilt the economy of information, such that now there is a cost that we don't necessarily see with the information that we're bombarded with.
I want to clarify one just real point that you said, that this economy of information, the gathering of it is controlled by these folks, and I would say the reputability of it is vetted by that process. And you did mention that, but I think it can be misunderstood by our listeners if the thought process is, they're controlling the information. They're not. They're just controlling the validity of that information, and the studies that come, they vet that, and then it's a certain quality of information that they allow into public learning, if you will.
Correct. Yes, because so like a scientist that wants to perform a research study needs to receive the money from somewhere,
right,
in order to perform that research study, to collect that information and then to disseminate it. And so I guess control is maybe not the right word, but they definitely vet it, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. There are some aspects, I feel like, where before the birth of the internet, there was certain controls over maybe not certain kinds of information, more media or entertainment, but I mean, yellow journalism, right? You can look to that time period, and there was some control over the information just because, they were trying to sell information. Yeah. Let's move on though to talk about the ways that has changed now, mm-hmm, because you no longer need to run your paper by the editorial board of a scientific journal in order to publish it and make it available to the general public.
Well, you do if you're doing it through any of the academic institutions or journals. That vetting process is right, still firmly in place. But to your point, you mean just publish it online. Just publish it as
correct.
Fact.
You can just publish whatever you want online, and the cost, so that you don't get paid by the journal itself for doing that research, but you want to get paid anyway. So if you're just going to publish it online, how are you going to benefit financially from publishing this information, from disseminating this information? And that is the question that we can ask ourselves as we consider the information that's coming in front of us, because there's still an economy of information. It's just not always going in the same stream, right?
It's almost flipped upside down.
Yes.
Because now the economy is on the back end. So as Shauna and I were discussing, if you have an influencer, maybe they are disseminating some kind of information to you, misleading information, right? And maybe the back end for them is that they sell their own line of supplements or their own passive income detox program that you participate in for 3 to 6 months or whatever, right? And that's how they get paid. But the social media space has grown so much that you are now the money in the system because you're the one viewing it. So someone's credibility used to be determined by the editorial board, the peer reviewers, the publisher, whatever. Now the credibility is based on the amount of views you receive. So now you're the product, and the more that influencer gets shared, right, the more followers they have, the more clicks they have, that's what gives them value. And so that's their monetary gain, because now other people want to participate in that influencer's ecosystem to get a broader reach for their own agenda. Yeah. So a good example of this, and I might get flack for this, but Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan isn't an expert on anything, really, but he has such a wide following, so he is deemed credible. And anyone who wants to have any kind of influence wants to be on his podcast, right?
Yeah.
They want his stamp of approval. And if you can get in that stream, then you can be guaranteed to have your monetary upside for your own agenda.
I'm actually in line for Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I'm just kidding. No.
I don't think you're exciting or controversial
I'm pretty
enough.
exciting.
I mean, you are exciting, but not that kind of exciting.
But that's such an interesting and insightful take on this. And I'm glad you guys had that podcast because it's true. Like if you look at the economy of information, and I think it'll give you pause, at least give you pause to say, is this where is this person making money, right? And so often I see these websites and these little information things, and they'll create like a bunch of information about a thing, and then they'll put little ads in there, and then they make money on those ads. And so the more people they can get to that site, they can make money. And so it doesn't matter. It's not the credibility of the content, it's the amount of people that they can get there that is generating revenue.
And not only revenue, remember status, right? It's that like, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with money. It can also just be status so that you can have influence somewhere else in our ecosystem.
Wow. You mentioned something with the Joe Rogan comment that I'm not controversial enough, and so I think that's also fascinating, because if the drive to any of these sites or any of these informational spaces, if the drive is to get people there, I want to speak just briefly to that, which is the controversial space. And there's a thing called like rage baiting where like you'll say something literally to just rage people in. And I accidentally did this one time on one of my early YouTube videos.
Before you were famous.
Before I was I'm not famous. But I remember I did one, it was like a 3-minute video on hydrogen peroxide, and talk about something that has been passed on for generations, that this is wonderful, we should all use hydrogen peroxide all over. And in medical school, we're like, hey, be really conservative with hydrogen peroxide. It's a free radical. You're putting it on your skin. It's bubbling because it's killing cells, and it's not actually disinfecting anything. And so we don't hardly ever use it in medicine. And I spoke to that, and I'm like, hey, stop using hydrogen peroxide. But that was the clickbait. It was the rage. That incited so much rage. And so many people, that was like my only video that like went semi-viral. And it was because I accidentally rage baited a whole bunch of people. I hooked them into a controversial topic where they thought they disagreed strongly with what I was saying. And it created a ton of traffic that then created a ton of, I didn't create revenue. I still don't make money on my stuff, but it's just, people do this deliberately. They rage bait people into their website, into their video, into their TikTok thing or their scrolling thing, and they're making money on it. Because the more clicks, the more engagement, the algorithm then pushes that out to more people. And so I want to talk briefly about rage. And so the rage baiting, and maybe just use that as a litmus test as you're out navigating the interwebs, and you feel pulled towards something passionately. Well, maybe that was deliberate, and maybe that's not the best information. And I just think it's an interesting phenomenon that can happen to us. And then once we're taken into any direction on any platform, we now have algorithmic proliferation of whatever we just clicked on. And so this is another thing I wanted to bring up, is the algorithmic proliferation of stuff in our feeds, and how dangerous that is.
I can give you a good example.
Yes.
Of this. I mean, I think everyone more or less understands algorithms, and if you click on it, it's going to give you, if you have a feed and you click on that video, it's going to keep giving you stuff. Okay. So last year we had a rat problem, not in our house, but on our property, right? So now we're beginning to search YouTube videos for how to get rats, how to catch them, how to poison them, how to trap them, right? And sooner, real soon, my husband Pete, his YouTube feed was just filled with rat content, right? And if we had the context of it, right? But if you were susceptible to maybe being paranoid, or maybe you were germophobic or something like that, then real soon you're going to believe that the world is being taken over by rats, that they are the overlords, that they control humans. You're going to start getting heebie-jeebies because it's all just rat content. That's all that's being fed to me. The same with Pete loves to work on cars and mechanics. Now, if you go on his feed, everything is going to be mechanics because he's working on his truck right now. So all the videos being fed to him is mechanic stuff. Now we can apply that to other things, right? Let's say you're looking up natural remedies for a cold or a flu, okay? Now you might get something like, drink some hot honey lemon ginger, and you do that, and it feels great, right? Because it soothes your throat, it soothes your cough. That's not harmful. But now the algorithm knows you're looking for natural remedies. And real soon, it's going to start feeding you natural remedies, and you can real quick go down a hole of misinformation.
Totally.
That is harmful, not just helpful, but actually harmful.
Yes. And there's very sophisticated content out there that's dressed up in PhD clothing. People are saying, I'm a doctorate and I have a virologist and I'm at blah, blah, blah university. And let me tell you what's real.
Yeah, or MD clothing.
I mean, yes. Yeah. And it's sketchy. It's really sketchy. I mean, and once you go down the rabbit hole, it just pushes you further and further. I've seen a lot of, I guess it's susceptible to all age groups, but I've seen some of my older patients who they tend to be a little bit more paranoid about things, and maybe about government or about various things, skeptical and sometimes paranoid. And as soon as they move into any of those spaces online, true or not, it is now flooded in front of them with more and more and more. And the emotional dysregulation that causes is profound. I've seen people create general anxiety disorder just from their feed. Like, I literally had to turn off my Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. I had to turn it off. This is someone else speaking, not me, but mine is mostly full of like stretching videos and exercise things
and
for
mushrooms.
my back. And mushrooms, yeah. But if you go down any of those rabbit holes, boy, it can incite such anxiety, anger, frustration, paranoia. Yeah. Like, and when if you're clicking on your feed and you're seeing your algorithm filled with things, and it's inciting some of those emotions, you may take pause and just search for mushrooms and like yoga videos.
Yeah.
As the antidote to that.
Can we pause right
and
there?
And by mushrooms,
on
I
that?
mean foraging for mushrooms, not the psychedelics, but whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that Criselle and I talked about in our podcast that's not recorded.
Yeah.
We should have.
We should have, yes. So I taught English for a number of years. I taught composition usually. And in composition, this is even in high schools, like they start teaching rhetoric. So rhetoric is basically the art of persuasion, and it's generally, in English classes, it's the art of written persuasion, but the principles apply to all forms of persuasion. And so the written word is not the only media for disseminating information, and anymore these days it's more video. But it's the same thing. So the art of rhetoric, the art of persuading your audience, you have three different appeals. You can make an ethical appeal, which is an appeal to authority, the PhD, the MD, the whoever. A pathetic appeal is an appeal to emotion. So the heart-wrenching stories, the ones that bring up a lot of fear or anxiety or,
Empathy.
Empathy, yes. And then logos. The third appeal is logos. That one's the hardest because it's an appeal to logic. And you're never like, it's more difficult as a rhetorician to make a logical appeal because you'd have to know your audience a little bit better in order to phrase the logical appeal in a way that they will see it. Mm-hmm. But as far as an ethical appeal, ethos, or a pathetic appeal, pathos, we're all human. And so most of us are naturally built to turn a listening ear to someone that has credibility in our eyes because of, their education, or someone that gains credibility by touching on our heartstrings in one way or another, even if it's a negative touch on our heartstrings. And so if we can take these skills that we're teaching our high school students, like every day in English class, and we just as an exercise, apply them to one video that you see on social media and evaluate how they are attempting to persuade you, then I think that process of deconstruction allows us to take a step back, maybe not click on the next clickbait video, maybe by process of analysis of what this person or entity is trying to do and how they're trying to persuade us, then we can maybe see a little bit more clearly. Well, they're using an ethical appeal, but how do I even know this guy's a doctor? Or this girl is like a doctor. And if that's the way that they're trying to persuade me, well, do I really want to listen to them just because they have an ethical appeal? What's the logos behind their argument? Usually there isn't. Mm. So,
and what I mentioned as the challenge to that is that the way we consume social media, if you're scrolling through videos, your feed, you're not perceiving it as a persuasive argument. You're just perceiving it as entertainment. Mm-hmm. You're not really analyzing what you're taking in because it's just a video. It's just entertainment. It's distraction, maybe.
It's dopamine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's a challenge with that kind of approach, even though that would be very educational and influential in the best way. The way we consume media now is as entertainment. And so what I thought about when you said, the ethical appeal, the appeal to authority, is many of the influencers now embrace and celebrate that they don't have authority, right? That they're just one of us. Mm-hmm. I am a stay-at-home mom just like you. I am a grandma just like you. I am a breadwinner just like you, and I'm going to tell you the truth, and this is my honest opinion. And so they're making would that be an ethical or pathetic appeal?
Maybe both.
Maybe a combination
both.
Of both.
Just, yeah.
But since we're on the topic of authority, this is something else Shauna and I discussed.
Yeah.
We discussed a lot.
Guys,
there was traffic. John was late getting to the studio.
I'll do that more.
What's driving us to medical misinformation, or that we can, what makes us vulnerable to medical misinformation is this growing anti-expert bias, which is simply put, so you're a family medicine physician, right? And so if you give advice to your patient about weight loss, okay, nowadays it's really easy to dismiss your recommendations because you didn't receive any nutrition training in medical school, and you're biased because you're just trying to push meds, right? There's all sorts of ideas that we can make up about a family medicine physician, right? But so because you are an expert in your field, family medicine, people dismiss you from the conversation if you step outside of that lane, right? Which is now obesity or nutrition or whatever that field might be. However, someone with no expertise is allowed to have all sorts of opinions. They are an expert now.
And be an expert.
Yes.
Yeah. Because they make that appeal to the other person's similarity to them.
Yes.
So you call it anti-expert bias.
Yes, is you have a really specialized expertise, and so I'm going to dismiss you because you're so specialized. But someone who is not an expert, well, they get a free pass. So I hate to pick on Joe Rogan, but that's a good, fill in some other influences. That's a good example of, so he's not an expert in anything, right? But he is so influential, and people will believe what he says or the guests that come on because he is familiar to them.
Yep.
We trust who we know. And even though we don't know the specific influencer we're following, because we're exposed to them so much through our algorithm, we begin to trust them.
Totally. There are so many of those, like credibility only built online and very little like science and understanding. And I think I run up against the anti-expert bias quite a bit. And especially in Utah, there's an anti-expert bias in Utah that's really pronounced. And it's okay. I do fine in those spaces, and I like everybody, but it makes it more difficult. Like in the South, in Jacksonville, where I did residency for 3 years, and even in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, there's not a culture of that as much. It's more, okay, Dr. Sanders, thank you so much for sharing with me. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go, keep drinking my sweet tea. But but there's not that disbelief in that, like, that bias against it. As I was speaking with one of my clients today on our pre-podcast discussion, we were talking about this, and he said it would be really neat to have an AI bias sniffer that could just detect if there were some false biases in whatever you're being shown. And I think that would be neat. It would be also neat to have like a good little AI fact checker that was just like checking facts and making sure you're getting good information, but also the bias. I think bias is, we did a whole podcast on bias not long ago, and it's a big deal to know when you are having bias as a listener, or when someone else is feeding you bias from their direction. And yeah, it's a good skill to at least suss out.
Well, we talked about bias, and I like this idea of the AI bias sniffer. However, we know that AI is bias in itself because we can train it, and it's very much based on the existing human knowledge, getting back to human knowledge. But Shauna brought up an important point on we are vulnerable to medical misinformation, especially when we have either had real negative experiences within the medical establishment, and also, or when we are aware of bad things that have happened within the medical establishment. So we brought up issues like, thalidomide in the 1950s, the Tuskegee syphilis trials, the experimentation on pregnant women.
The Women's Health Initiative study that put a generation of women off of hormone therapies.
Yep.
The study when the American Academy of Pediatrics said, don't give your kids peanut butter until they're at least 2, and created an epidemic of the peanut allergy. Like things like that. I think that sometimes when people run up against those enough, then they have
license almost.
Yes, they have some bias that they can't even see anymore. Because
you guys are feeding the group that is anti-expert right now. Good job. But you're mentioning it in a way that's wonderful. I think your intention is not to do that, but I guarantee there are listeners who just heard that, and they're going to take that and put that and say, you're right. Remember this thing? And they're going to use that to come at me with like disbelief and distrust. And those biases are so hard to overcome. I had a client, he was very much anti-expert bias, anti-medicine, all those things. And I think part of it is our own fault in medicine that we haven't spent enough time with and the time with people equation, that time with people part of the healthcare equation is getting smaller and smaller. Not in my clinic, but in most clinics out there, they're allotted, 5 to 15 minutes with each patient. And from that only reaffirms that it just kills trust. Conversely, if you spend an hour with somebody listening and hearing and understanding and helping them with some of those biases and overcoming some of those, and they feel heard and listened to, and there's trust there, and there's magic in that trust, and we're killing that, and thus we are proliferating this anti-expert bias by the way that we deliver healthcare, by destroying that trust part. Yeah.
But I think there is a key that we shouldn't skip over. That's a way for providers of specifically good medical information to distinguish themselves from those who provide medical misinformation. And that is humility, because I can't think of a single outlet for medical misinformation. Can't think of a single outlet for medical misinformation that transmits that misinformation with humility. They never say, well, we're not quite sure about this, but these is what the studies show. It's always the studies, like, these are the anecdotal evidence I can give you. And it is like, there is no humility involved in this, right? But if a family physician says, like, this is the best studies we have available, and these are some of the, this is where we are in medicine, and we don't have 100% surety, but these are the studies that I trust, and this is what I'm presenting. There's an element of humility there, and that lends itself to building trust. It's hard to have trust built. I mean, it's harder. It's easier to distinguish those that are providing misinformation because there is no humility there.
Yeah, good point.
Unless there is, because I've seen some very sophisticated, very humble videos disseminating super false information.
Really?
COVID, I mean, there were some really, 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 like, I think it's criminal. It's like reporting false information. Like, there should be some standard to reporting, and that's degraded over time as well with our news networks. But like, I feel like as in the healthcare profession, we're held to a standard to do no harm, and do no harm means physically, emotionally, financially, in my opinion, but also in sharing information. Like, doctor means teacher, and we're here to help people understand and learn and grow. And it's so cool when that trust relationship is established, and you can see some of those biases melt away, and you can, like, I have a really sweet patient. She's been with me for a while, and she also is fraught with a lot of these information biases and anti-physician bias and allopathic medicine bias and osteopathic medicine bias, and but she comes to me seeking understanding, and over time, and with lots of humility and lots of trust and lots of time. One time she came to me and she says, "I hear what you're saying. We've reviewed your labs. This is the information. This is the data. This is what the body of science suggests is the right thing to do in this situation. But there's some reason I can't do it, Dr. John." And I just said, okay, your body, your decisions. I don't hate you. You get to tell me to pound sand or not do what I say, and I'm not offended. I just want you to know that. And over time, I think even recent, she told me, she said, "Dr. John, I may not always do what you ask me to do or what you say is the right thing to do." Because she's going down all these other pathways, because her algorithms are chock full of all this other information, and she's trying to navigate that, and I'm sympathetic to it. It's super hard. And she says, "Dr. John, I may not do everything that you advise me to do, but I want you to know that I appreciate you, because I know that when I come here, you're not selling something. And I thought, that's so cool. That's so cool. But I think it speaks to the power of those people who are selling something and the power over this lady's mind. Like, even though she knows there's conflicts, they're selling something, it's still hard because they're so convincing. They're so, their arguments are, it's just very difficult. It's very difficult.
I mean, I think you're addressing the issue of access to good medical care, right? And, you know, yes, Shauna and I mentioned, yes, there are all these terrible things that happened in healthcare historically, and even now are occurring that we may not be aware of, right? And sometimes the medical establishment has not been humble enough to say, whoa, sorry, we did make a mistake, right? But the answer to bad medicine or bad medical care isn't no medical care. It's better medical care, which is what you try to provide, right?
Yeah.
But also in that same vein about, okay, you mentioned a patient who really is in these rabbit holes, right? Constantly and consistently being exposed, which I've also experienced as a midwife. And then also in the vein of bias, one key point is the anchoring bias, which is, I think, helpful to explore the concept of the anchoring bias and how it affects our medical decision-making in the context of misinformation.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So an anchoring bias. Okay, so I'm just going to give a non-medical example. So we used to live in China, just across the border from Hong Kong, and on the weekends we would go to Hong Kong, and then there's this, it's called the ladies market, the Mong Kok ladies market, and it's not just for ladies. I don't know why.
That sounds very inappropriate.
It's not that kind of inappropriate.
Okay, it's a ladies
market that would sell traditionally like things for women, right?
Got it.
So purses and cell phone covers and little key fobs and shoes and handbags and, you know, and when the understanding there is that you're going to bargain, you're going to negotiate, okay? That if you don't negotiate, maybe they'll be like, okay, that's great, but if you bargain, it's not rude.
No, nobody's
expecting,
offended, right?
Yeah, it's a bargaining market. Okay, so imagine you're in this market and you walk past a stall and let's say there's some shirts, but there's a posted price, 60 Hong Kong dollars, right? That price tag is there to anchor you to a price. It has nothing to do with the actual price or margin that seller needs to reach for that shirt. But when you go to bargain, you're going to be very hesitant to bargain to start lower than 60. Even though maybe at 30 Hong Kong dollars, they could still be making a great profit, right? But you've been anchored, okay? So some of the challenge that we come up against with medical information, misinformation as healthcare providers is someone walks in already anchored. They are already anchored to something that has no bearing on reality, right? But they don't even want to consider the possibility. So an example from my line of work was, for a long time across the States and in Utah, the C-section rate was really high, like 50, 60% sometimes in some hospitals. The World Health Organization recommends a C-section rate no higher than more or less 15%, right? If you do less than 15%, that means that people who need C-sections are not getting them. If you do more, then it means those who don't need it are getting C-sections. And there are downsides to having a C-section. You don't just want a live mother and a live baby. You also want a live mother, a live baby, and a mother who doesn't have to have a repeat cesarean, right? So there are all these cons to having too many C-sections. So people would come in or the clients who would come into me would be so anti-C-section that they want to avoid the hospital altogether, which that is a legitimate choice. That's fine. And usually they're not making it based on only not wanting a C-section. There are other values that come into the equation. But then let's say as pregnancy progresses or labor progresses, it becomes apparent that a C-section is likely and probably the best
Course
outcome,
of action.
course of action, and that is what's best. Despite all the best desires and all the best interventions and approaches, a C-section is still what you want because that's what's best.
Safe mama, safe baby.
Safe mother, safe baby, and a safer future, right? But they are so against this idea. Meanwhile, the C-section rate in Utah is below 20% now,
Cool.
right? But they've come in anchored to that idea that the hospital is going to do them harm because of misinformation that's still being repeated online. And so it makes them pull back and avoid medical care even when it's clearly indicated, despite their best efforts, despite our best efforts to have a vaginal birth. They are so anchored in that idea that they put themselves in harm's way.
And that does harm. I mean,
Yes.
babies die because
Yes.
mamas refuse to go and do the
Yes.
thing.
Or mom's
Or
hemorrhage,
mom's hemorrhage and
because
die.
they're exhausted.
Yes,
And,
yes.
All those clinical
I did OB for 10 years, and it is I think, again, it's time and trust and relationship. And with some of my patients who had these biases, my wife had three of our four babies at home. And so I could relate and discuss with them. And I said, well, yeah, that's great. But, we can just have a safe mama and a safe baby. And I know you have all these other thought processes around this and maybe biases and anchored to this thought or anchored to that thought. But I would just, let me anchor you to one thought. And this is the one that you and I will this is our mantra. We're just going to, every time we talk, every time we go to do anything together, we're just going to say the same mantra. And it's safe mama, safe baby. And let's just stay on that vein. And then all this other thought process is great. And if we can accommodate, beautiful, water, you want to, labor in the tub, wonderful, let's do all the things. And if there is a sign that is distress or whatever, I'll help you make this call, but just trust me that I will do the right thing. I have no conflicts here. This is going to be good, but let's just have the same mantra. But that takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to get some minds to that state. The easiest ones are like, whatever you say, doc, it's great. I just want to have a baby. And I'm like, okay, great. This is going to be easy. But the ones that I have to disindoctrinate or recalibrate, boy, it can be really challenging. In our current healthcare environment, it's even more challenging because again, I just shortened your time per patient, and it wasn't I. It was the administrator of the hospital that says you have to see so many patients per hour in order to make this work, or I'm going to cut your pay.
Because of insurance.
Because of insurance, and the inefficiencies and all the things, and so these docs are handed a very high pressure, low time situation, and they meet with a person who needs more time to develop trust, to slag off some of those biases.
And it's not only childbirth. This is cancer treatment, allergy treatment,
cancer treatment,
obesity,
vaccinations,
heart health.
Everything. There are so many biases that are indoctrinated into our minds, and sometimes we don't even recognize them as biases. We're just like, whatever. It's just the truth, and so, boy, that's really, really hard. And when we're put in those situations, it does take more time, more trust, more compassion, more humility, and those things are very difficult to deliver in 5 to 10 minutes. I would say impossible. Hopefully over multiple visits you can maybe get there, but that's been really, really game-changing in my clinic, is being able to spend an hour with someone and listen and hear and understand and create some empathy to their state, because it's not always their fault. They're not bad people. They're wonderful people.
Oh, yeah. And educated too.
And educated.
This is not an ignorance issue.
No.
Yeah. It's not an income issue.
No.
We are all exposed to misinformation a lot of the time.
Yeah. Shauna, you had something?
No, I think we're reaching the end of our time here on the podcast. I just want to, I think like humility maybe goes both ways. Mm-hmm. I know I have had quite a few anchoring biases over the years, and not always in the medical space, but like somebody gave me a book by Dr. Sears when I was pregnant with our first child. And so I never let him cry. I wore him all the time. It was lovely, but also it was exhausting. And I had this anchoring bias that told me, you're not a good mom if your child cries himself to sleep. And it took me a long time to get over that. And so what I would say is, in addition to the provider of that information, medical or otherwise, having a dose of humility, it's also incumbent on me as a consumer information to also have humility and recognize that I might have bias and that this information might be appealing to me because of my bias. So trying to be humble and open to having my mind changed. Just as a listener to this conversation, I recognize some of that in myself. Like, I tend to have biases. And so the humility applies equally to me as it does to the provider of the information. And I know that, your humility could then be triggered by someone else's humility and they could still spread information, yada, yada. That is probably true. But when it comes down to it, like, that's one of the only ways I know of to somehow be able to see past my bias to get to the heart of what's going to be best for me in a medical space and otherwise.
There's magic in that relationship. I often tell my clients I'm their Sherpa. I'm just carrying bags for you up this mountain of wellness and this journey that you're on. And I'm here to give you counsel, to carry some things and to help you with some of this hard stuff that we're going through. And it's so wonderful when both parties are receptive of that relationship. And it does create healing. Just that creates healing. And it's lovely. Real quick, as we end here, I want to share some tools with folks, science tools that are kind of new and that people might not know about. Healthcare professionals, clients, people, families. One of them is examine.com. Examine.com is really cool. They have a database of information on a lot of nutraceuticals. And so people ask me, because they always say, on all nutraceuticals, they say, ask your doctor, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that thing, because they're always coming up with new cool stuff. And so I have to have somewhere where I can go to look up the reputability of bromine for the treatment of XYZ, because they heard it on something, on some video. And I was like, well, actually, it does work. And here's some evidence, and it's level A evidence, which is the best evidence for the treatment of this thing. And so there is really cool data on nutraceuticals, and you can gain access to real information on that and the studies, the science behind them.
That's Examine?
Examine.com. Super rad. One of my favorites, medicine especially can become very dogmatic, like, I trained 20 years ago and this is how we've always done it. But we need to be flexible and be able to change. However, once we get out into practice, we're cranking, right? We take a lot of continuing medical education courses, yes, and we stay abreast of some information that way, but is it possible to stay abreast of everything? No way. And so over time, sometimes you haven't kept up with the science as well as you probably should. And so a really rad tool that came out not too long ago is called OpenEvidence AI. And OpenEvidence is super awesome. I forget who's funding it, but it's I remember I looked at the list once upon a time, but I saw, these are like Ivy League medical schools. So their endowments are funding the piercing of paywalls on data. So AI is only as good as the data as you feed it. And so ChatGPT might not be the best source for medical evidence because they can't get through to JAMA or the New England Journal of Medicine or all these journals that are behind a paywall, and understandably so. You got to pay something to get access to it because research costs money and et cetera. So
Economy of information.
Economy of information.
Yeah.
So let's just pay for it. So they have endowments, they paid for it, and now anybody with a NPI number, so doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, PAs, they can gain free access to OpenEvidence AI. Patients often have questions that I'm not sure the most updated answer to. I know what I learned, which was years ago on that thing, and it may have changed. So let me just look. And so I will quickly pull up an article. Boop, there it is. Oh, it turns out that that's different now than what I learned 10 years ago. And so it is a wonderful tool for information for people. And if you have a healthcare provider that you like and trust, encourage them to engage with this open AI, OpenEvidence AI, and then utilize that. Go to them and ask questions and then nudge them. Hey, did you know you had OpenEvidence AI? You can just pull it up right now. I don't have access. I don't have an MPI. And that the reason for that is because the endowments are only so big, and you can only pay for so many people to have access to these paywall. It's
when you say
silly.
I don't have access, you're speaking on behalf of the patient.
Of the patient,
you
sorry,
personally, Dr. Sanders, do have an
I do,
MPI.
yes.
Okay.
And it's lovely. And I use it every single day. I love it. It's wonderful. People have questions. I'm like, pretty sure I know the answer to that, but let me just double check if there's anything new. And there's, in order to do that 5 years ago, there was not a strong, easy way to do that. I had to assign it to my medical student who was rotating with me. Hey, do a data pool on this topic because I haven't looked at the literature in a while. And so they would bring it to me as a presentation.
But then you have to synthesize all of it.
And that took 3 days. But now, in less than 30 seconds, any question you have, I can pull up 7 articles.
Wow.
It's incredible. It's incredible. They now also have a scribe option. So it can be scribing for me in the background. It's HIPAA compliant. And then as I create my plan, it creates the evidence on that plan. And I can click on those little icons for, oh, did you know that, ketamine actually does help with general anxiety disorder? And, it's one of the recommendations. And so it's really rad to have more information and more data points. And I think for science, it really sifts it really well. And so we can cut through some of the medical misinformation and put good information into people's hands. Those are just 2 tools. There's a whole bunch of really great tools out there. Do you guys know of any that use maybe Criselle at medical school or anything? Or okay. Well, any other thoughts in closing, guys? Fact checking. I think they use like Snopes and things like that, to check.
If you see something, I tried this as an experiment before I came in for the podcast. I was just on my Facebook feed. In general, if I look at Facebook, for example, I'll just click on the friends. So it only shows me posts from my friends. So I have fewer suggestions from the algorithm. But if you're on the homepage of Facebook and just looking at your feed, if you see a post that catches your eye, click on the name of that page or the name of that person on Facebook. So I just saw one and I was like, oh, what's this all about? I clicked on the person. This was a page, but it was named for a person who claims to be an attorney and had 81,000 followers, but he was following 0 people out of somewhere in Florida. And so I think that that's a very easy and quick way to vet the information you're consuming, is to just look at the source.
Yeah.
Because clearly this source is of very little value to me. I have no interest in watching or listening to information from someone who's created a page and is not following anyone, but is only trying to build an audience of followers. That's clearly a questionable source. So even without having to go to Snopes or wherever to check the source, look at the actual source in the social media, find out about who's providing this information, and that can tell you a lot about it, credibility.
Also, if you see something that is, let's say a medical misinformation, something, you're not quite recognizing it as misinformation, but your spidey senses have gone off. Usually when you click on that and it is a real person, they will have content in that same vein. So an influencer isn't just going to come out and say vaccines are bad. They will have other content that's also anti-expert, anti-medical. That will be their whole niche, right? That's why people have niches right now, is because that's what makes them popular. You need to specialize in some type of content. But another good, if you find yourself, if you find your feed is filling up with this kind of stuff, you can clear your search and watch history. And then a proactive way of, if you don't want to like quit social media cold turkey, why not just search things that you really are interested in? Like, I love watercolor. So go and follow a couple of people who watercolor. Or I love global health issues. I can follow global health bodies around the world, for their short form content, just so that I'm more proactive in what I'm actually consuming instead of just this passive algorithm learning what kinds of things make me tick.
Yeah, I think, like you say, I use social media for mushroom foraging and exercise routines and mobility stuff and baby kittens and puppy videos, and it's fun and it's cool. I'm just like, okay, as long as I don't get sucked in for too long, I have a timer, and maybe that's a more reasonable way. And if you were going to go look for science stuff, maybe the Mayo clinics, the Cleveland clinics, the .edus, the university websites, search some reputable spaces that will have less propensity, because they vet themselves pretty hard. Like, and then those cool AI tools, I think there's going to be some more and more of that coming down as we feed AI appropriately. The problem with misinformation and AI is if AI pulls from that misinformation, now it's continuing to proliferate misinformation. So that's another danger that you have to be aware of.
Vicious cycle.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. This was such a fun podcast. Knowledge, learning, growth, information, misinformation, and let's just keep on learning and growing and overcoming our biases and keep on grooving along. That was so fun. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you learned and grew and learned some cool stuff, tips and tricks, and keep on keeping on. Voyage Clinics Podcast. Like and subscribe.